Hello everyone and welcome back to the final video in our 6-part tutorial series. So today we're going to be rendering the final image for our scene. This is what the fruits of your labor has delivered upon us. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to tweak some of the settings and then we're going to save a final image of our scene right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to make sure we have some settings enabled. So if you have a graphics card in your computer, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Edit right here, drop down to Preferences, and then we're going to go to System. And if you have a graphics card, make sure you have either CUDA or OpenCL if you have an AMD card in your computer. If you only have a CPU, don't feel bad. That also works, of course. Personally, my graphics card's a lot more powerful than my CPU in terms of ray tracing, so I'm just going to leave that one enabled. But again, if you have a better CPU, you can select that. So that's just a side thing you want to make sure you have enabled if you are doing a final render. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Camera tab, also known as the Rendering tab. So your rendering engine depends on what engine you want to use. Cycles will always produce the best results, but it will also take a lot longer than Eevee would. Eevee is the new rendering engine for Blender 2.8. It's a lot faster, but it's more like a game engine where you lose some realism for performance. In this case, we're going to use Cycles because it's the most realistic one and it looks really cool. So what I'm going to do is with Cycles selected, you could just press Render and it would render out your image, but we want to tweak the settings a bit. So starting off, one thing that I like to do is go down to, where is it? Tiles, and if you have a graphics card, 256 is usually a pretty solid tile size. Otherwise, if you're doing a CPU render, a smaller number like 32 is also good, and you want to set that to both the X and Y, but in this case I'm going to leave it at 256. Light path, this is how many bounces your light does before it goes back to the camera, or no, how many bounces it does from the camera to the light source, sorry. Basically, we can lower these a bit to increase the performance. So I'm going to set diffuse down to, I don't know, about 3. Probably, I'm going to set diffuse to 2 because it's pretty. You can set this one pretty low. Glossy, I'll leave at 4 because we have a lot of glass in our scene. Transparency, we can set this one pretty low. I'm going to say 2. Transmission. Actually, no, sorry. Glossy is reflective. Transmission is glass. Since we have a lot of glass in our scene, I'm going to leave this at 12. And that's about it for light pass. You don't really have to understand what all these mean. If you want, there's plenty of tutorials. If you Google cycles, like fastest cycle settings or cycles performance increase, you'll learn a lot more about these. But in this case, you can just kind of follow along with me. That's about it for most of the settings. There's a couple other things you could tweak, but in this case, we're going to do some test renders real quick. So the way ray tracing works is it's going to keep shooting out rays from the camera to approximate the color of a pixel. And the way you can increase the quality of your render and decrease the fuzziness or noise is to have a really high sample count. So you can see here render set to 128. So if I press F12 on my computer to render out the final image, you can see it'll start chugging away. And let me quickly check. What are we doing this at? You don't have to do this, but I'm going to lower the percentage so it goes a bit faster. But I'm going to hit F12 one more time. And you can see it's going to start rendering out a rough final render, but because I set the sample rate pretty low, it's not going to look as high quality as it could, basically. So I'm going to let this finish real quick. Okay, now it's finished. Now you can see it does look pretty decent, but there's still a lot of noise going on. I'm going to show you a quick way to fix that, but the only real way to get rid of noise permanently is to set a really high sample count, and that's what we're going to end up doing, but I'll also show you the way to add a denoiser to kind of quickly add it. It isn't the best way to go about it, but it is something to do if you have a not as powerful PC, basically. One thing that I do think I want to do real quick is let's take a look at this rendered view again. Actually, it might be fine, so we'll leave it as is for now, but basically One way you can increase the or decrease the render times is by enabling a feature called denoising. And basically what denoising will do is it'll kind of smooth out all that noise. Sometimes it doesn't look that great, but if you get the settings just right, it can. So I'm going to bump up the render samples a little bit to about 300 and the scaling to about 75. So we're going to give this another render, but we're also going to go to the View Layer tab right here, and we're going to check this Denoising tab. Now, we're not going to tweak the settings. We're going to leave those as default. But if we render this image, you'll see that we're going to give it a second, but basically, as it renders enough tiles, it'll start smoothing them out based off the surrounding pixels. It just is an algorithm. It isn't like some sort of AI, kind of like with the RTX graphics cards from NVIDIA. But you'll see here in a second, if we just wait for it. And you can see right there, we had a couple of tiles be denoised. So you can see that like sharp cutoff from when it goes to denoised to not denoised. You can see it's a little bit blurry some places, but you can see like right there, it just did another couple tiles. You can see it actually looks pretty dang good for such a low sample count. It does look a little bit blurry, but you can see it's like it's getting like exponentially better basically. So you know, if you kind of just play with your render settings, you can kind of you can be surprised what you can get out of it. So there's a couple things that we want to tweak with this scene though. So we want to tweak the render a bit more is what I should say. So let's go back to our scene right here, and I'm actually going to quickly see if there's any hidden objects. So yeah, you can see I actually still have the sun in my scene. That's what those sharp shadows were coming from. So I'm going to quickly delete that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the sample count for our scene. But before we do that, there's actually a problem with our candle. So I'm going to select these 3 candles with shift click and hit shift H. And you probably didn't notice it, but the candle wick is actually not black like a burning candle wick. So what we're going to do is we're going to select, we'll start with this candle. So I'm going to, let's turn off subdivision surface for now visually so we can see a bit better. And if we go into wireframe view, I'm going to just zoom in here really tight. And I'm going to select that, go to select tool. I'm going to select that center vertex right there. And then again, we're going to hit Control plus to all the way to the base. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our materials tab. We're going to add a new material and call it wick for candle wick. And we're going to hit assign with just the wick selected. And this one's easy. We're just going to make it a sharp black, and we'll just bump up the roughness. You're not really going to be able to see it, but we do want to make sure that it's there. So I'm going to do the same thing with these other candles. So I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard to zoom in, and I'm just going to Control plus all these candles, add a material, and we'll reuse that wick material and assign. So we have one more. We're going to zoom in a bunch, deselect everything, click on that vertex, plus, plus, plus. One more time, and we will then add that wick. This, if you didn't duplicate your objects already, you could do this now to one object before you duplicate it. But in my case, I have to manually do it to each candle. So now if we go to material view, you can see we have that wick texture. It looks like I went looks like I went a little too far on these. Why did it do that? Let's turn off subdivision surface. Yeah, it looks like that's kind of a bug. So let's just add a loop cut right here, and that should isolate the black material as such. So let's do the same thing here. Just going to add an edge loop and kind of shrink that in a bit. And that kind of isolates that black wick material. So let's turn back on subdivision surface for our candles that we turned it off on, so they're smooth again. And actually we have to add it here as well. So let's just add that loop cut like that. And you can see there's our candles. They look really cool. And if you want, since they look kind of uniform, if you just rotate on the Z, so those bumps and like crevices aren't all in the same direction, that would make it look a little bit more believable. So I'm going to hit Alt-H to bring everything back into our scene. And yeah, so we are ready for the final render. So if you want to change the resolution, you can do so right here in the output tab. You can also change the file size. By default, it'll be a PNG. In this case, I'll bump it up to 100% and we'll do a 920 by 1080 render. I'm also going to turn off denoising for my render, and I'm going to keep it pretty low for the final render because I want it to be pretty quick. I don't want to wait like an hour off camera. So in this case, I'm going to set it to something reasonable, like, I don't know. We'll try 800. And actually, I will turn on denoising, but if you want a really nice render, I recommend bumping this up to like 1300 and leaving denoising off and seeing how that goes. In this case, I'm going to set it to 800 and I'll just leave denoising on. And we might have some things we need to tweak in our scene. There might be an object that's hidden somewhere. But in this case, we're just going to press F12 and I will let this go through. Now, we're going to speed through so you won't notice, but you'll see here in a second. And there's our finished render, just as easy as that. So you can see that it took me about 9 minutes. So this was a pretty fast render. Excuse me. You can notice that some of the shadows are a bit like blotchy, but that's because I had the denoiser on and I didn't really let it bake that long. Now, we're not quite finished yet because even though it is finished, we can actually add a modifier to make it look a bit more true to life. So I'm not going to close out of that window. I'm just going to minimize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the compositing. Sorry, probably not compositing. Let's try this. I'm going to make a new area. So we're going to actually, okay, sorry. We're going to change our 3D viewport. So we're going to go from 3D viewport by clicking up here, this little drop down, to compositor. And we're going to check use nodes. So here's our final render output. What I want to do is I want to add a glow node. So if we hit Shift A and click on the search bar, we can type in glow, maybe not glow, sorry, what is it? We need a filter glare, sorry, a glare node. And what I did was I set the streaks setting to fog glow. And if we take a look, you can see we're starting to get a bit of a glow. So let's see if I can kind of show you a side by side here. So this is, let's see here. So this is without the glow. So you can see that's what it looks like. And then this is it with the glow. So we can kind of tweak it a bit. Threshold will basically make it a bit lighter. So maybe if we set that to 0.75, kind of brighten up the image a bit. And mix, let's see here. Mix just kind of makes the overall scene a bit darker, except for the light sources. So if you want to make it look a bit more eerier, in this case we could probably leave it at either 0 or I'll set it to 0.25 in this case. But yeah, so you can see we get that like nice candle glow. It is a little bit more different from our original reference picture, but you can see it looks almost the same. The background, if you want to change the color to more of a gray, I guess I went more green in this picture. And before we end the video, I just want to remind you, if you actually want to save your image, what you can do is in the render result, go up to Image, Save As, and then just pick anywhere on your desktop, and you can title it here. So in this case, I'll name it Final Tutorial Render. And then you can either hit Enter, or over here it says Save As, click that, and it will save your image file. So let's go right back to the video. But yeah, that's about it for this video. So let's kind of do a quick review what we learned in this video. We learned some of the basics of 3D rendering and like final export on the render. We learned, keep an eye out for those hidden objects and also how you'd go at your final render. So that's about it for this tutorial series. If there's any more videos relating to this specific render right here, it might be more of a follow-up if people are unsure about certain things that I did in the comments. But that's about it for this video. So thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you're awesome. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. I probably won't be doing any more beginner tutorials like 3D viewport tutorials like that basic for a while now since we have this series. But yeah, thanks for watching. Have a good one and leave all your questions and comments down below.